Welcome to this session of PlantPure Summit 2016, co-sponsored by plantpurefoods.com. Our guest is Victoria Moran. Ms. Moran has been a vegan for 32 years. She's the best-selling author of 12 books, including Creating a Charmed Life, The Love Power Diet, and the iconic Main Street Vegan. Victoria is also an inspirational speaker, certified holistic health counselor, and host of the Main Street Vegan radio show podcast. She's the founder and director of Main Street Vegan Academy, training and certifying vegan lifestyle coaches. Welcome to the summit, Victoria.
Thanks so much for having me. This is an exciting summit.
and you're helping it be so.
Well, you've got everybody. This is really cool. This is one that I'll be as excited to listen to as I am to be talking to you.
Well, that's nice to hear. That's great. So 32 years. When and why did you become a vegan?
I wanted to be vegan for 44 years. I guess that was when I became vegetarian. It was much more difficult in those days. It was also much weirder in those days. And for me, I had an extra difficulty, and that is that I was a practicing binge eater. And I would go to the 7-Eleven in the middle of the night and look at those little packages of all the things that I felt I absolutely had to have. And they all seemed to have some sort of whey or egg albumin or something in them. So I tried, and I would succeed for a while and fail for a while. But it was really after my daughter was born, I knew that this was the best way for any human being to live on a whole host of levels. I wanted to raise my daughter living this kind of life, eating this kind of food. But first, I had to get recovery from my own eating disorder. And once I did that and had the power of choice about what to eat, it was no contest. This was it. And it's been a happy life for quite a while.
That's great. Did you, were any publications or any books or anything that you read, did they help you along the way?
Absolutely, but there wasn't very much. That's the difference between then and now. In fact, I just put something in my newsletter coming up about a little cheesy dip recipe. Now, we have all these wonderful plant-based cheeses out there now, so if somebody has that craving, they don't have far to look. But in those days, there was really nothing. And there were actually only 2 cookbooks that I knew of. The Vegan Kitchen by Freya Dinshaw. She and her husband Jay had co-founded the American Vegan Society back in 1960. And every time I say that, I think, oh my goodness, that was another world. But there was the Vegan Kitchen. And then there was a book called 10 Talents by a wonderful Seventh-day Adventist mom who had been Mrs. Minnesota. And those were the 2 cookbooks. And then otherwise, there was a lot of literature from the American Vegan Society, from Jay Dinshaw, and lots of good books on vegetarianism, but you had to get them from England, because the first book to be written in the 20th century about vegetarianism, I actually typed. I didn't write it, but I typed it. The author, Nathaniel Altman, and I were both living and working at the same organization in suburban Chicago, and he would type every chapter of his book, which was called Eating for Life, and he would bring it down to me because I had an electric typewriter in my office, and I would type and think, gosh, maybe someday I could write a book, and that has happened.
Fantastic. So how has becoming vegan changed your life?
Oh my goodness. Well, it's given me integrity, because for so many years, this was something that I wanted to do and I wasn't doing it. So I feel that I have those years to make up for. I feel incredibly blessed health-wise, personally. For one thing, not only do I no longer eat for a fix, and I have to give most of that credit to a 12-step recovery program, but certainly coming right in there with the plant-based diet meant that other people, even other people in recovery who were trying to eat smaller portions of the standard American diet, just had more trouble staying with sane eating than I did, because I was able to eat more satisfying foods, bigger quantities of certain foods, and really have that feeling of satiety that is certainly important to somebody like me who get to be 65 pounds overweight. You don't do that for not liking food. And I guess the other thing, Lee, because I was able to raise my daughter this way, I feel like there's this wonderful legacy of living in a way that I think ultimately everyone will live. I think that the day will come, and not that far from now, when people see, oh gosh, among the many things that we didn't see, we didn't see that having slaves was wrong until fairly recently in history. We didn't see that not letting women vote was wrong until really recently in history. I think people are going to see that eating plants is what humans are supposed to be doing. And to have gotten in on that early, I really feel blessed.
That's a great answer. In terms of your physical being?
Well, the weight has stayed off about 65 pounds for 32 years. And what's interesting is people will always say, how much did you lose and how long did it take you? But to me, the real question is, how long have you kept it off? Because the statistics are awful and they're different wherever you read them. But generally speaking, it's something like, for someone who loses 25 pounds or more, to keep it off for 7 years or longer, they have only a 2% chance. These are awful odds to be better off as a drug addict. And yet, with this wonderful way of eating combined for people who need it with some kind of support for change from the inside, if somebody's using food in a way that is for emotional solace, or if it goes all the way as mine did to food addiction, I believe people need a little bit beyond the food. But when you put those two things together, you've just got it all. So I have avoided the diseases to date that my family of origin on both sides have. My parents were both really obsessed with weight because they both came from an overweight family. My dad's family and my mom's had a lot of diabetes, a lot of heart disease, and so they were really, really interested in weight loss. In fact, my dad was a diet doctor. He was an ENT who became a diet doctor. And my mom at one point worked in these reducing salons that had the belts and the rollers that jiggled people. Well, I went there as a little girl and I jiggled a lot and my fat stayed just where it was. But I knew early on I was bad for business. My body wasn't right. The kinds of foods that I desired were not right. I didn't know what to do about that, obviously, until much later in life. But the upshot of it is that now, and I am 66, I'm not on any kind of pharmaceuticals. My cholesterol is great. My blood pressure is great. My blood sugar is great. Everything is working well. And I believe that I owe that to this way of life.
That's fantastic. And may I say that you don't look 66. I've got to tell you that. I mean,
thank you.
A good 15 or 20 years younger than that.
Oh, that's so kind. Well, what I think is that so many of the women that I know who live this way look so sensational that it's sort of like we look like the vegan 56. It's 66. I guess, okay, we look like, okay, if you eat a whole foods plant-based diet, you can look like the vegan 56, which is the omnivore 42. That's good. I'll work on that one. It's a good life, and I'm very grateful.
Well, that's great. And you shared it with a lot of people. And so that's my next question is, when and why did you decide to write your first book?
Well, I didn't know it was going to be a book. And I was thinking about that as I looked over the questions that you sent me. Some people are very adamant about this way of eating, that you have to do it right now, overnight, all the way. And yet it seems that a lot of people need to take some incremental steps to be able to stay with it forever. It was like that for me, and it was also like that for me in terms of writing a book. I think if somebody had said to me, okay, write a book, I would have said, I can't do that. I'm just a girl from Kansas City. I mean, Dickens and Tolstoy write books. I don't do that. But what happened was I went to college late, and I was getting a degree in comparative religions from North Central College in Naperville, Illinois, and I received a fellowship for foreign study. And all that said was you can study anything you want anywhere on earth as long as you leave the United States. So my husband said, well, gosh, you should go to England and study vegans. And I thought, of course, I'll go to England and study vegans. Because at that time, there were so few people doing this in this country, and they were so spread out, it would have been really, really difficult to do a project like that here. But in the UK, and I did go to England, Scotland, and Ireland, there were incredible people, and I got to meet some of the people who actually lived in this way from the beginning of the modern iteration of what this was. There have been people who've eaten this way throughout history, but not too many that we know of that have been documented. And in 1944, these beautiful, conscientious people in England decided that they wanted to be pure vegetarians. They wanted to get rid of the eggs and the dairy. And I met some of these people and wrote the paper for my fellowship, called it Compassion, the Ultimate Ethic, and Exploration of Veganism. And that actually became my first book. It was published in 1985, when there weren't many people interested in that kind of book. But it started me on a career and a life and a commitment that has really treated me well.
That's great to hear. And how many books have you written since then?
12 are out in the world, and I'm working on a new one. I'm working on a cookbook with J.L. Fields, the blogger J.L. Goes Vegan, and that is called A Coach in Your Kitchen, the official Main Street Vegan Academy cookbook and lifestyle guide, and that will come out from our friends at Ben Bella in January 2018.
Well, good luck on that. I think it's an incredible accomplishment to have that much work behind you, and to keep on going like that is just great. So you're also a motivational speaker. So tell me about the very first time that you were a motivational speaker. How was that? Your very first
well, I don't know how motivational it was, but it was when I was in 4th grade. And this is a really good story, I think, for anybody who wants to speak but maybe doesn't feel exceptionally confident in that way. I was a fat kid. I was a nerdy kid. I was not popular, but I was chosen by somebody to speak for the school assembly on the importance of trees. So I was very nervous, and I got up to the podium and stood behind it, not knowing that all the lights would go out and the spotlight would shine on me. So I read my little talk about the importance of trees, and at the end of it, the whole school applauded. And in that instant, I thought, this is the world's best kept secret. These are kids who will not talk to me on the playground, but because I got them out of class, they clapped for me. And ever since then, I have had complete confidence and comfort in front of an audience. And I've learned that when you speak to a group, people really do want to get something out of what you're saying. And if you're speaking at a company, you're getting them out of work, just like I got those kids out of class. And if people have paid the babysitter and found a place to park and come to hear you wherever you're speaking, they really want to take something home with them. And it's just such a gift. I love speaking, love it to pieces. It's this wonderful energy exchange.
Well, and speaking of that, what are some of your most memorable experiences as a motivational speaker?
Oh, my goodness. I guess the one that comes to mind first was at a group called Speaking of Women's Health, where I was one of their keynote speakers. I was doing 11 markets for them, but in the very first market in Cincinnati, I followed Florence Henderson and 8 dancing boys with If They Could See Me Now. Now, since I don't sing at all, you wouldn't want to hear me sing, to come out with the power of that music behind me was so much fun. And that also taught me that when people are jazzed, when people are already revved up and they're excited, and then you come in with something like, hey, guess what? You want to eat differently? You want to eat a lot of salads and beans? If you just hit them cold with that, they're going to say no. But when you get them in this enthusiastic state, it's like salad and beans. Wow, that sounds good.
What an experience. Florence Henderson, really? So how and when did you get the opportunity to host your own radio show?
I actually started in radio with Sirius before it was Sirius XM. And I had a show called The Charmed Life. Actually, I had two shows, Charmed Life and Charmed Life 2, one on Saturday, one on Sunday, on the Martha Stewart channel. That was exciting. That was back in 2006. And it really gave me a lot of experience. Now, I'd already done a lot of radio guest shows for a really long time, because when I was literally a kid, when I was 19, 20 years old and living in Kansas City, my hometown, I was the only vegetarian that anybody knew about. So whenever a radio host wanted to do a show about vegetarianism or organic or natural foods or anything remotely like that, or of course in January, weight loss, they'd call me. And so I started getting experience that way. But I had my own show on Sirius for just over a year, and then the Martha Stewart channel did some restructuring as things happen. And then in 2012, after Main Street Vegan came out, about a week after, because I was actually on the book tour, I was staying in Dallas at the home of some wonderful vegans who had a whole bunch of dogs and a very large in-the-house potbelly pig. Interesting experience. My cell phone rang, and it was a woman from Unity Online Radio, and she said, "You want to have a show? You can call it Main Street Vegan. It's about time we get back to our roots." Well, what was interesting about that is that Unity Online Radio is the radio arm of the Unity Churches, a Protestant denomination headquartered in Missouri. And their founders really had been very vocal vegetarians back in the 1800s. One of their sons had been a vice president of the International Vegetarian Union. They had a vegetarian column in their newsletter. They had a vegetarian restaurant at their headquarters, one of the first vegetarian restaurants in the country. But after they passed away, and over time, that kind of fell away. But what's really interesting to me personally is that the very first time I ever heard the word vegetarian, it had something to do with them too, because both of my parents worked in the days before daycare. So I had a nanny. She was kind of an eccentric older lady. She was really wonderful. I call her my first guru. And I came home from first grade, all excited to tell her that I had learned the 4 food groups, which of course that implied that half the food we eat needs to come from animals. So I recited them very proudly, and she said, "Well, that's fine, but did you know that there are people who never eat any meat? They're called vegetarians, and I could take you to the Unity cafeteria and get you a hamburger made out of peanuts, and you'd think you were eating beef." And that really stuck with me. And it made me think there's so much I don't know, and I have a feeling I'm not going to get a lot of the best stuff from the conventional sources like school. So that's the Main Street Vegan podcast. It's every Wednesday afternoon live, and then because it's a podcast, it lives forever, which is very, very cool. And it actually is nominated for a Veggie Award in the VegNews Best of 2016 contest. Now, so are a whole lot of other fabulous podcasts, but it's very cool to be included in that.
Congratulations, and I wish you well. I hope you win. I mean, it's nice to get recognized for what you do. It really is. So, I mean, what's it like hosting your own radio show? I mean,
it is so much fun. It's sort of like what you're experiencing now, I would think, because you get to talk to people, some of whom you've heard of, some of whom you know, and others who just show up and are so fascinating. Yeah. So for me, it's this wonderful, almost art of first scheduling the guests and trying to get a balance, because with my show, it covers every aspect of the vegan lifestyle. So we do health, nutrition, animal rights, fashion, raising kids, traveling, whatever could impact somebody's life who chooses to eat as a different drummer diner and live in this different kind of way. And I try to balance it out with medical doctors and dietitians and people of this nature, and also with people who are just fascinating. So just recently, I had a woman named Christine Luhid from a tiny little town in Canada who got a great deal of press a couple of months back because she did something that a whole lot of people have wanted to do, which is rescue a lobster from a grocery store. It's, you know, when you think about all that's being done for animals now, and there's so much out there about the conditions of animals and people helping, one lone lobster in a little supermarket in a little town in very inland Canada. And it was a rather dramatic story of how she had to learn how to ship him via UPS to a coastal area where another animal protection person was willing to collect him and take him to the sea. I mean, it was just a sweet, sweet story. And I read about it when it happened, but I never would have really heard it from her and had the experience of kind of being in her aura, even though it was via Skype.
Sure.
So I love it. I just feel like once a week I get to talk to somebody cool or a couple of people cool. It's pretty wonderful.
Well, yeah, you learn so much. It really is amazing to me how much you learn when you talk to people. And this whole experience for me has been fantastic so far, and I'm just getting started. So, with the summit. So it is cool. It's a really cool thing to do, to be able to talk to interesting people. So what about your family? Was your family supportive? And you know, your parents, your siblings, your husband, your children, and so forth?
Yeah, I was married to my first husband at that time, and he actually had tried to be vegan when we met. We both kind of fell off and fell back on and things like that, but he was really open to it. And my parents have always been open to everything that I wanted to do. I really appreciate that. Things like, for example, I had a home birth with my daughter. We did have a medical doctor and a midwife. Now, my mother was a little worried about that because it seemed kind of new to her. But my dad had gone to medical school in the 1930s when it was common enough that in order to be licensed, every medical student had to attend at least one home birth. So he was like, yeah, so what? You know? So, yeah, so that was good. I think at that time, it was so weird. People didn't know what to do with it. It was just like, oh yeah, you do a lot of weird things and here's just one more. And now, of course, it's just wonderful. Now, I do live in New York City, where it's very, very easy. My current husband was not vegan when I met him. My first husband passed away, and so I dated guys who had to be either vegetarian or spiritual or both. And for 9 years, that didn't work out. So I thought, oh, well, I'm too old for anybody to want to marry me anyway, so why don't I just date somebody normal? So I met William, who at that time was living in a suburb and had a real job with health insurance, and thought, you know, this is not going to be anything serious, but gosh. Well, 2 weeks after we met, we went out to dinner, and before that, he'd been very polite. We'd go to ethnic places and, you know, we'd do pasta or Chinese or something. But this particular night, we went to a sports bar, which was not any place I had ever been before. And he ordered this big steak and didn't even ask for it well done. And I'm thinking, you know what? I thought I could do this. Don't think I can do this. And the next morning, he called and said, I've been thinking. And I'm thinking, well, you too, Buster. He said, I've been thinking, I'm going to stop eating meat. And he did. And the vegan took a lot longer. But when he finally got that, he just so opened up to it so that he actually has written a screenplay that we're working on with Gene Bauer of Farm Sanctuary and a production company called Choice Films, which is called Miss Liberty, and it's about a cow who escapes from a slaughterhouse. So with a whole lot of somebody else's money, that will hopefully, please God, one day be at a theater near you. And it's just so cool to see that here was a guy who wasn't interested in any of this stuff. And in terms of the healthy part too, even after he stopped eating meat, that was strictly for ethical reasons. The idea that he would ever eat anything dark green, or that he would ever eat bread that you couldn't roll up and flatten out and play Holy Communion with. I mean, that was just completely beyond him. And now he eats this pristine diet. I mean, it could be printed up in Better Homes and Bodies. So it's wonderful that when you just kind of give people enough rope, lots of times they'll find their own way.
That's the way to do it, I think, is to, you introduce people to things and then you kind of let them go at their pace and let them discover it on their own. And that way they get the message better than if you were just to pound it into their head,
Oh, much better. I mean, nobody wants to be pounded.
No, I got to say, I hate getting lectured even when it's about a subject I believe in. You know what I mean? So we really tried to do that with both the Forks Over Knives and PlantPure Nation to not be preachy, to just sort of put the information out there and let people make up their own minds. So, and
that's also a very good sales technique, because when you just kind of let people come to you, they want to do it. I remember there was an organization that's now called, I think, the National Health Organization. It used to be called something else. And the person who headed that at that time would say that when somebody would come to him and say, well, what's wrong with eating meat? He'd say, I don't know that there's anything really wrong with it. And they'd say, well, you don't eat it, do you? And he'd say, not very often. And they'd say, well, how long's it been? He'd go, 23 years. And so when you let people dry you out, then they want to dry you out. Where if you just take everybody as, oh, this is a live one, I'm going to convert, it doesn't work as well.
Yeah. So what about offspring, kids?
Oh, thank you for asking about one of my favorite subjects.
Yeah.
Well, I have been graced only with one, but sometimes when God gives you perfection, you're just not going to do that over again. Her name is Adair, Rachel Adair, and she has been vegan since weaning. I was still lacto-ovo-vegetarian when I was pregnant, but became vegan when she was an infant. And she's never had an animal product except for some cheese one day at a La Leche League meeting when she was 18 months old and just reached for it and ate it. But other than that, 100% all her life. She works now as a stunt performer. And I love to share that with people because so often people will look at our fabulous plant-based athletes and say, well, yeah, but they built the muscle eating meat.
Yeah.
Well, she didn't. And you can find her online, adairmoran.com, ADAIR, and you can see these pictures of her doing stunts and doing aerial performance, and it's a wonderful thing. And then the other thing that she does, this is on the side labor of love, is that she is a licensed wildlife rehabilitator and has one little nonprofit up here in New York City called Urban Utopia, and they specialize in saving orphaned, sick, and injured wild mammals in New York City. And so many people say, wild mammals in New York City? It's like, well, we get a lot of squirrels and some possums and some bunnies and a few other creatures every now and then. So it's wonderful that she's built this life, which interestingly enough to me, when we think about this way of life, at least when I think about it, there are many, many reasons to do it. Certainly we have this pressing environmental situation going on now that makes it really imperative that people look at this. But I think most of us in our personal lives think about it in terms of health and ethics. And when I look at my daughter's life, it's a combination. It's the health and the fitness on the one hand that enables her to do the work that she does, and then the ethics on the other hand that enables her to do her heart work. So it's nice. I'm so proud of my daughter.
You should be. I mean, what an interesting career choice to be a stunt woman. Did she set out wanting to be a stunt woman? How did she get into this?
No, she's actually an actor, and she makes part of her living acting as well. But she was working on an Eddie Murphy movie a long while ago, maybe 10 years ago, and they needed a stunt double for a little boy. And they thought she was kind of about the size of this teenage boy, and asked if she would do that, but it didn't take any skill. It was just a passenger car stunt. So she spent 2 days with the stunt crew and was so taken with what they did that she went to Seattle to stunt school, stayed out there a couple of months. She has great stories to tell about living in a hotel room in a suburb and having a George Foreman grill and a bunch of vegetables from an Asian market. So just eating at stunt school was a story. But anyway, she did that, and then she came back and started getting work. She was the stunt double for a couple of seasons on Gotham. She was the double for the young Bruce Wayne, and then he had a growth spurt and they needed a new stunt double. But she's done House of Cards and all kinds of wonderful shows. It's a very, very cool way of life.
It sure is. Well, man, and you've got it. Those people, I mean, they make it look easy on screen, but they really get knocked around. I mean,
oh, they do. And the muscle she's got. I mean, this is plant muscle. It's impressive. It impresses even me, and I've known him forever.
So how did you become a holistic health counselor?
Well, that's a very interesting question. In probably 2004, I started to see the writing on the wall about publishing. I'd always made my living as a writer, supplemented as a speaker, but primarily I was an author. And at that time, book advances and royalties were such that if you wrote a book every other year, you could live. But then this thing happened called the internet.
Right.
And I started to see, you know what, I'm not sure publishing is going to keep going quite the way it has been. I think I need a backup. So I decided at that time, because I had written a lot of self-help books about spirituality and women and living well and that kind of thing. And so I thought, maybe I should be a life coach. So I asked a lot of friends and mentors, and they all said, no, you shouldn't be a life coach. You don't have the personality for it. And it's kind of like we were talking about when you tell somebody not to do something or that they have to do something, they want to do the opposite. And I thought, well, don't tell me I can't do that. So I got a certification as a life coach. And I learned that all my friends and mentors were correct. I really don't have the personality for that. So I thought, well, I'm into all this health stuff, and I've been a health writer forever and ever. So why don't I get a holistic health certification? Well, at that time, there weren't many places to do that. And most of them were offering this idea of, as long as something is alternative, we're going to say that it has a place. Well, you know, there's a lot of alternative stuff that is just downright silly. Yeah. And a lot of it also just ethically does not agree with me. So I found a little program that is no longer around, but it was around when I needed it, to get that certification and the American Association of Drugless Practitioners credential, and took that course. And that was great. I learned a lot. They actually let me trade some for lecturing, and it was terrific. But then when I got out there doing that as a one-on-one coach, I realized, you know what? I'm not a one-on-one. I'm a one-to-many. That's why I speak. That's why I write books. But I had these credentials. And then, interestingly enough, and this is one of my favorite stories, and I'll try to condense it. So I had sold Main Street Vegan as a book proposal, but hadn't written the book yet, because that's how it works in nonfiction. And the publisher said, we're happy to have you, thrilled to have the book. Oh, but by the way, and this is a direct quote, we hate Main Street. You have to change it. Well, they'd bought it, so I had to change it. So I'm trying to write this book, and, you know, I couldn't come up with another title because I knew within me it was supposed to be called Main Street Vegan. So one Saturday afternoon, my husband and I are walking up Broadway, and we ran into somebody so famous that you can recognize him from the back, and that happened to be Michael Moore, the filmmaker. Yeah. Now, everybody's politics aside, you know, when God wants to give you a miracle, he gives you who he gives you, so I'm telling the story as it is. And I knew that he had liked one of my other books because he had reviewed it favorably in Oprah's magazine a while before, and we met briefly one time. So I just gave my card to the woman who was with him there, and when he saw that it was me, he came, oh, Victoria, let's talk about food. So we started talking about food, and one time I just said, oh, I'm writing this book. It's supposed to be called Main Street Vegan. Publisher hates it. He said, they're wrong. Let me talk to them. And he convinced my editor that that indeed was supposed to be my title. And as soon as she called me and said that was my title, all these other ideas started popping. So it's like, oh, there needs to be a Main Street Vegan radio show, which of course there is. We've already talked about that. And there needs to be this and that and the other thing. And then the one that just kind of floated to the top, like this was totally supposed to be there, was Main Street Vegan Academy, training and certifying vegan lifestyle coaches and educators. And it was so perfect. Yeah. And so I realized, this so often happens in life, I'd gotten those 2 certifications and realized, you know, I'm not a really very good coach. But I had the background to put together a fabulous program to train coaches in what really is close to my heart, which is vegan living. So there you go.
That's a great story, and it is perfect for you because you skipped the one-on-one part and went directly to the one-on-many when you become the head of the academy there.
It's amazing how that works. And one thing I see with my graduates, they come through the academy and they bring their other life and work. And some of them have been in the corporate world, and some of them are yoga teachers, and some of them are, we've even had medical doctors and dietitians. And so whatever they bring, they take out into the world enriched to go forward and do more. And it's not that one of us who maybe isn't very scientific is going to do something more going into the health aspects. Maybe that person is going to do what one of our graduates, Kat Mendenhall, did, which was start a vegan cowboy boot company in Dallas. So, you know, it's you get around people who think like you and have some of the same convictions that you do, amazing things happen.
You got any other special or memorable stories about graduates of the academy or students? I just love them. I feel that if the only thing my daughter ever gives to me in terms of grandchildren are dogs, that's fine. I'll take it, because I have to date 240 grandchildren, most of them younger than me, some of them older than me, that are out there in the world doing all these amazing things. So I have grand people in 15 countries. So I'll tell you about actually our youngest graduate. Her name is Rindala. She's 18 years old, a student at NYU, and she comes from Saudi Arabia. Now her goal is to go back and start PETA Saudi. Now we know that this is not a country that is open to a lot of new ideas. Right.
But she's committed, and she's going to do it when she finishes NYU. Her family is behind her. She's actually converted her entire family, so they're all vegan. And, you know, that's just so, I mean, to me, that is amazing. There's just no place that these ideas can't go and can't reach and can't help people.
Yeah. That brings up an interesting question for me. How does the idea of veganism mesh with Islam? Is it part of Islam? Is it part of the Islamic tradition or not?
No, not veganism, and really not vegetarianism, but it's very interesting that, like in all the religions of the world, and obviously some of them are very, very veg-friendly. Jainism from India, for example, actually requires vegetarianism of its members. But we did have a wonderful imam from Princeton on the Main Street Vegan podcast a while back, Sohib Sultan, and he talked about the animal kindness aspects of the Quran, and the way that the Prophet talked about eating in a way that was simple and not overindulging, and that historically Muhammad evidently was not vegetarian, but evidently ate meat very sparingly. Now in Islam, there is the one situation where the faithful are supposed to either slaughter a lamb or pay to have one slaughtered one day a year. Okay. And I was speaking with Rindala's mom, and she said, well, you know, as long as Rindala only tells people to be vegan 364 days of the year, we think she's going to be just fine.
That still leaves a lot of lambs on the block, sorry to say.
Yeah, but it's also a lot of meat not eaten. You know,
yeah,
it's
there you go.
Like people, you know, they don't like Meatless Monday and this and that. I mean, I would rather everybody was vegan, you know, 20 years ago. And yet, because people are on this road, you know, I'm just glad that anybody's coming, whatever degree toward this they're coming.
Yeah, and if you get them up to, you know, 364 days a year, that's pretty good. That's pretty good. Explain about that.
Live in that world.
Yeah. So what do you think are the most important reasons for switching to a plant-based diet?
I think it's the one that'll get you to make the switch. It's very interesting to me. I have a friend who has known me forever. 20, 25 years anyway, which seems like forever. And she's very accepting of the way that I eat and the way that I live. She's never wanted to do it. But her blood sugar is giving her some trouble. And now she's looking at this. Now, ordinarily, I would say, oh, the ethical is the most important, because whenever you're just doing it for health, you can always say, well, a little bit of this won't hurt. And yet, for her, that wasn't going to bring her in, and the health does. So I would say whatever it is that is going to make you change. And I think that what happens, it's like so many other things. You open a door that's been closed your whole life. You don't know anything is back there. But when you open it, you find there's not just a little closet with some information in it. There's this whole vast arena of stuff going on. And you can learn about health and nutrition and cuisine and fashion. I mean, it's amazing. I think if somebody were to do a beautiful mandala, a wheel of vegan living, you would find something for everybody. I had a funny little thing happen not too long ago. I was going to meet a friend, non-vegetarian friend, for dinner, and we decided on a macrobiotic place. And my friend was saying to her friend who joined us, isn't this wonderful, because Victoria can get her vegan food and we can have fish. And the friend said, well, I'm vegan. And my friend said, you are? I didn't know that. And she said, well, I don't eat vegan, but all my cosmetics and toiletries are vegan. Which is just like, wait a minute, are we so much the cool kids that people are going to fit to be part of the club? And yet whatever door opens is going to let people in on the rest of it. And I think that's particularly important with the environmental part of things, because whenever I speak, I always say, who's omnivore and who's health conscious and who eats everything and who's vegetarian, who's vegan, whatever. And then out of the vegetarians and vegans, I say, tell me who's in it for health, and I get about 50%. Tell me who's in it for animals, and I get about 50%. Tell me who's in it for the environment, I get 2 or 3 people out of a great big group. Even though if we don't save the planet, it doesn't matter that we're healthy or that the animals are doing better, because there's not going to be a place for anybody to live. But I wouldn't know a thing about this. I'm not somebody who's interested in scientific sorts of things. And so if I weren't vegan, I just might know that you should recycle and turn off the water when you're brushing your teeth. I wouldn't know that the most important thing anybody can do is cut down severely, or ideally cut out entirely, animal products to save our very planet and protect the climate. You learn these things when you start eating plants.
It seems to me that is one of the most powerful arguments that's going right now in favor of a plant-based diet. And I hear a lot of people, especially younger people, talking about that. I mean, it seems like there's, the age group that are sort of middle-aged people that are starting to get sick or worrying about getting sick. They are very much into it for the health reasons. But the younger people, it seems to me, the ones that I talk to anyway, are motivated more by the humanitarian aspects of it and the environmental aspects.
Well, that's good to hear, because I certainly see the ethical part. I run into a lot of young people, and what's different in that generation of people going vegan than in my generation was we all went vegetarian first, and we stayed there a long time, and some of us died before we ever got any further. But now people hear about this stuff, and forks over knives, even though primarily it's about the health. I mean, I've met 20-year-olds that saw forks over knives, and the next day they were vegan. So that's very, very powerful. I don't know, the environmental to me seems to make people cut back a little bit sometimes when they feel like it, or do the farm to table or the locavore thing, when we know that it is really that we just can't be raising so many animals.
No. Well, the cool thing about going plant-based, though, is that if you do it, you're addressing all 3 problems at once.
You are. It's wonderful. And it's magical. And then so many other things besides. And I always tell people when they do this to add more to their lives than they subtract. Because when people say, okay, you're a vegan. What's that? And you say, well, we don't eat blah, 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 blah. And then, of course, if you're doing the whole foods plant-based, you even add on some more things. We don't eat blah, 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 and blah, blah, blah. And it's almost like, okay, you're going to add on a vow of celibacy. I'm out of here. But if instead you look at how much we get and what we get in addition to these kind of spiritual things that happen in terms of knowing that you can look a cow in the eye, but just cuisine. I mean, it opens up a world of cuisines when you travel that most people never experience. You go to the farmer's market, you find all these stunning vegetables, many of which come in purple, that we just weren't eating when we were doing the McDonald's thing. It's very cool. And then if you do want to do the whole vegan thing and get into the fashion and then the cosmetics and following the entertainers and the celebrities who are doing it too, it puts a lot of pizzazz in your life.
Yeah. So compared to when you started this 32 years ago, where does the idea of veganism stand today?
It is night and day. The one thing is that people know what it means. And I understand there's all this controversy between vegan and plant-based. I guess Forbes magazine or Forbes.com actually did an article about that, which totally shows you how mainstream we've gotten. But people know what vegan is. They know it in a restaurant. Food manufacturers will slap it on labels even when it doesn't need to be there. My favorite was a big display of dates with these big green stickers, vegan. It's like, it's a fruit. You don't need to tell me that it's vegan. And yet, at least that manufacturer seems to think that that's a selling point. Well, I shouldn't say manufacturer because you don't manufacture dates. That company that distributes dates. So it is known in the world. And I think another really big difference is that 32 years ago, people believed it was dangerous. You were told things like, maybe as a lacto-ovo vegetarian, if you're careful, you might be all right. But nowadays, like I was talking to a cardiologist at a cocktail party and mentioned I was vegan, and she said, oh, I wish I could get my patients to do that. And then she stopped for a minute and said, gosh, I wish I could get myself to do that. That was not happening in 1983.
No, it certainly wasn't. But it is happening more. As a matter of fact, just earlier today, I interviewed a cardiologist who is not only a vegan himself, but also uses it he has a clinic and he uses it as a primary care for his patients. So I just think that's amazing. The more MDs that come around and the more cardiologists and specialists that come around, the better it is. I really think the idea is taking hold now,
It's so important. And on that topic, I would love to give a shout out to a couple of websites. I have nothing to do with these, but it's a way to find a plant-based physician in your area. So one is called VegDocs. I believe that's going to be vegdocs.org. It might be .com. That's a nice one, very easy to use. And also the Plantrition Project has a listing of practitioners. Because when you really want to do this and you've read everything and you're all excited and you go to your doctor ready for them to say, good for you, and they say, oh, I don't know.
Yeah.
It's discouraging. And if you can find somebody in your area that's on your insurance, that's a really good thing.
It really does help to have your doctor in your corner. There's no question about that. So where do you think the idea will be 10 to 15 years from now?
I hope, Lee, oh my gosh, I really truly hope that we get from where we are now, which is further along than I ever thought we'd be, to in 10 to 15 years, where it is such a viable thing to do that it's just sort of like, I don't know, you say, do you want vanilla or chocolate? Where it's just like, yeah, some people do one, some people do the other. So that in 30 years, maybe 50 years, for sure, because I don't know that we have any longer than that, planet-wise, it is really the way that the vast majority of people on this planet live. My vision is that it is going to get to the point of the way we see smoking nowadays. I mean, when I grew up, practically everybody smoked. And now if I see somebody standing outside a building in a cold winter smoking a cigarette, I feel sorry for them. And I would love, I'll probably have to look down from the great beyond to see this, but I would love to see it when somebody sneaks a burger in a dark alley. Because it's just such an uncouth thing to do.
I got an interesting answer to this question from somebody I interviewed yesterday, I think, who said that, well, I hope 30 years from now, we aren't even going to be calling it plant-based eating. It's just food, you know?
Yes.
This is food, and that is what we eat, and we just take it for granted, you know?
Yeah. Well, and something could happen, and I hope it's just a wonderful consciousness lifting of humanity, but it might really be the climate change and things that we're facing that are not positive. But it could happen much more quickly. You know, I'm not a futurist, I don't, and I'm not a psychic, but I just know that it is growing at a rate beyond anything that I ever could have envisioned.
It's really exciting. It really is exciting how quickly it's growing.
And it's around the world. I mean, I know that we're looking at more meat consumption in China and in India, but in those countries as well, we're having an animal rights movements. And in India, where they've always been, even the many Indians who are vegetarian, very, very invested religiously and otherwise in dairy products. And now there are a lot, particularly of young people, pushing for veganism there. So I think as people get on board, and the other thing that I see in my Main Street Vegan Academy graduates and just in other people that I observe in person and online, people who get involved in this don't just do it and mind their own business. They figure out a way to start a business, start an organization, do something in their community, small, big, medium, it doesn't matter. It's not just, oh, we've got more people eating this way. No, we've got more people out there in the world shining their light and making this happen for those around them. It's exciting.
It is, and your enthusiasm is infectious. So it's been great talking to you, and thank you so much for being on. Do you have a website where people can find out more about what you do?
Yes, it is mainstreetvegan.net, and you can get to everything from there. Information about the books, our production company. In addition to Miss Liberty, we're working on a documentary film called The Compassion Project to interest people who identify as religious or spiritual in vegan living. You can get to the podcasts from there, weekly blog, just all kinds of stuff goes on at mainstreetvegan.net. And we've also got all the links there for social media.
Sounds great. So thank you, and I want to thank everyone for watching and encourage you all to learn more about our efforts to build a PlantPure Nation at our website, plantpurenation.com.
Yay!
Yeah, thanks again.
Thank you.